And I'm going to disappear into the background.
I'm going to hide the chat so it doesn't distract me. All right. Well, kia ora tātou katoa, nau mai ki tēnei hui topa. It's really exciting to be here tonight, and it's lovely to see 23 people with us. So we're a boutique collection. Hopefully everyone made it in safe and sound. We had some issues with the links, but yeah, it's good to see there are people here. So I'm going to start off by just introducing myself, and then I'm going to introduce Welby and talk about how we're going to run the evening, and then we'll have lots and lots of time for him to share his whakaaro with us. So, ko ai au, he uri hau no tāwahi, e noho ana I Ōtepoti. Ko Vivian Anderson tōku ingoa, ko au te manutaki o te kura a ko taitoka. So I'm hailing from Dunedin, where I'm the Dean of Education. And yeah, it's just a great honour to MC this chat tonight. And I just want to thank you all for coming. Evenings are very precious. I want to thank Liam Rutherford for all his work with the Aotearoa Educators Collective and wrangling us into this to sort out this evening. Claire in the background, Claire Amos is managing tech for us, and Sarah Iono set up the link. So yeah, really grateful to all of those people as well. So we're going to have a conversation about Welby's latest book, which I'll talk about in a moment, but we've got a Q&A function running. So do please feel free to put questions or comments in there at any point. And if you can use that rather than the chat, that would be appreciated because it just sort of helps us manage the process a wee bit. There's not that many of us, so if you end up using the chat, that's fine, we'll be fine. So yeah, but that's there for you. And what we're going to do is have about 40 minutes of story time with Welby, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. So hopefully heaps of time for just a conversation. So I'm just going to begin by introducing Professor Welby Ings, and his backdrop is actually his house. I thought it was an actual backdrop, and I didn't believe him until he showed us around it. So phenomenal, phenomenal backdrop. We're all jealous. None of us quite meet that, but that's what you get when you have a designer in the room. So I'm actually going to read off the AUT website because I really love this bio, so just bear with me. Professor Ings is a disobedient thinker, an internationally renowned speaker and an educational reformer who sees productive disobedience as behaviour that pushes our thinking and action into new and unconsidered realms. Specifically, Professor Ings questions our anxious micromanaging of thought and our preoccupation with tick box assessment. In 2017, his best-selling book, Disobedient Teaching, became influential in the reconceptualisation of New Zealand education. So I had the great honour of reviewing Professor Ings' latest book, Invisible Intelligence, which is why we're here tonight. And I'm going to say more about that in a moment, but back to the AUT profile first. So Professor Ings is also a designer and director. His interest in film as a storytelling medium has seen 3 short films, Boy, Munted and Sparrow, selected for numerous international film festivals, including Cannes. Boy qualified for the 2006 Academy Awards. This makes me feel really underachieving. Professor Ings believes that scholarship is, by its very nature, creative. He sees creativity as part of normal human thought. He does not see teaching as dissemination of knowledge, rather as creating an environment for learning. Effective learning, he says, involves ongoing, intelligent, disobedient acts that help to move knowledge beyond the constraints of formula. And I just want to note too that Welby has also won the Prime Minister's Award for Tertiary Teaching Excellence, the New Zealand Government Award for Sustained Tertiary Teaching Excellence. In 2013, he won the inaugural AUT medal for his contribution to learning and research. And he's also a member of the Designers Institute of New Zealand and the New Zealand Screen Directors Guild. So I think from all of that, we can deduce that he's also a good teacher. So I'll just share a few wee reflections on his book, and then we'll get into the questions. So this book was published by Otago University Press, and if you haven't read it, read it. I've put posters all around my work, and those of you who are in academia will know that we get asked to review things, and sometimes it's something we do because that's how knowledge is made and honed, but it's a really big job, and we often do it kind of at the end of a day, really tired, somewhat not begrudgingly, but it's a tiring another thing. This book was therapy for me. It came at just the right time. And my endorsement is on the back of it, but I'm just going to read a little slightly larger chunk of my review just because it tells you how it affected me. So this book is exceptional for the way in which it offers a critique of mainstream education while affirming the important and hard work teachers do every day. Welby critiques the education system without falling into blame. Throughout, he holds in view the complexity of educational work and of teachers' mahi. There are no simple solutions in this book, but there's a whole lot of humanising of teachers' work. And it reads as a really refreshing counter-narrative to the politicised teacher blaming or very simplistic claims we're hearing of quick educational fixes. Through careful scholarship and deft storytelling, Welby's writing makes the familiar strange in all the best ways possible. This is a book that has potential to move both hearts and heads, and it affirms the complex work of teachers while highlighting things we might change. So it really is a huge honour to lead this conversation with you tonight, Welby, Professor Ings. Thank you for writing the book. Huge thanks. So we'll start with our first question. And our first question is, tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write the book, and talk as much as you want about your own educational journey into school, through school and beyond. So over to you for a moment.
Kia ora, Viviana, kia ora te whānau. So I'm a teacher and I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of that word. It carries huge responsibility and guess humility. I don't use the word professor that's my title, but I don't wave my doctorate or those things around because I realize that, like, at the moment my mum is dying, and so we're looking after her palliative care, and I watch the carers come in and I see the deep embodied intelligence in the way they work, and it humbles me. It genuinely humbles me. So I wrote the book as just a contribution to the whole, to a greater whole. It's not a Bible, and I'm not trying to proselytize with it. But it seems to me that for a profession that is so profoundly committed, who most of us are called to teaching. It's a calling. Change that's badly thought through, we understand that it has the capacity to injure, not just not be effective, to actually cause injury. And so I thought, it's 7 years since I wrote Disobedient Teaching, and it takes me 7 years to write a book, apparently. That's what I realized it is, apart from a couple of academic tomes, which really were much shorter, but not so close to the heart, so let's be honest. So, so I didn't know it was going to land in the climate that it landed in. It was finished about a year and a half ago. But there's a part of me is a kind of a fatalist, and I sort of think, well, maybe publishers knew something I didn't know, and so it landed. It landed at a certain time. What I tried to do was, I get irritated when I hear people saying research shows, and they don't refer to the research, and it's like putting the word science in front of something. This is scientific method, and you go, what do you mean? Something fundamentalist is science. Isn't science something which is always open to and critiquing itself and trying to understand context? Isn't science that is prepared to weigh up more than one thing, that can accept that multiple things could be useful? So I thought, I'm very I kind of, I guess, devoted my life to trying to understand this thing called intelligence, because I, without being whining, I grew up believing I wasn't. So I refused to see them as learning disabilities. I had differences, and fortunately and unfortunately, I'm a twin. My twin sister didn't. So she waltzed through education, bless her. Not every day did I feel quite so magnanimous, but she had a great time, and I went into the role of sort of well, if you're going to have one great twin, somebody's got to pay the price, so it must be the strange one, and I bought that. I bought it, and when I was sent to college, I grew up in a wee rural area. So we went to college, and they did a test for entry in, and I was to be put in the bottom of the vocational classes. And English, I guess mine, the way it was spelt, it didn't read like English, but it was my reflection of the way I spoke. So, so I got the chance to have a couple of subjects, well, one subject where I wasn't mixing in a world of diminished horizons. And I loved that. I even tried adopting a German accent. You know, it was that wonderful to a scrubby little kid from Pukeato. Oh dear. Oh, but and and slowly I learned to read, and with different milestones and different approaches. And then I got angry. I didn't know how to change things properly. And so I got angry and I turned into a little shit and I got expelled from school. And so I went to Teachers College and I got suspended from Teachers College. But when I was at Teachers College, a wonderful thing had happened. So this is in the early 70s, and New Zealand was in a state of quite radical thinking around education. We'd been resourced by people like Sylvia Ashton Warner in 1963, who had reconceptualized what literacy for young kids was. And if you read her stuff, it's the exact opposite of what's being proposed now, or almost the exact opposite. She understood that literacy, that reading and writing was emotional, and it came from the lived experience of people. It embraced the lived experience. It didn't chop off some words and go, they don't come in because they don't meet the formula we've got. It said, no, pull them in, pull them in, pull them in. They become the resourcing of this. So she believed in emotional intensity with reading. It's you know, when you have a look at how far some thinking has drifted from the brilliance of New Zealand education, that, you know, Fraser and Beebe, and then coming through right through the 70s. I mean, it wasn't perfect. I mean, we were racist stuff. We had really crap attitudes to women. There was some bad stuff, but there were visionaries who were behind a way of thinking. And instead of running overseas to try and find guidance, we looked into the heart of who we are as a nation, and we said, who is this people? Who are we? And how might we learn to read? So she faced opposition. She faced terrible opposition, similar arguments to what we see today. But her work, there were other writers at the same time. There was John Holt, who a year later wrote this beautiful book called How Children Fail. He was a teacher. He knew the grit of it, but he also knew the devices that children use to protect themselves from being shamed. And so they shape failure for themselves. And I always loved this. Time described him, so a great reformer, and they described him as the gentle voice of reason. And I thought, I wonder if I could do something like that in a country that I love very deeply, for a profession that I have immense respect for. Could I contribute not a gentle voice of reason, but really resource that with research. So instead of throwing the word research around as a kind of an addition, have anything you read, you can go to the end note and it's there. And there's not just one citing, there's 4 or 5 pieces, including something that might contradict it. And so I understand myself as someone who was brought up through an education system that had some visionaries behind it, and was very comparatively humanist. So if we look at these two extreme models, so New Zealand has had a very socialized, very humanist education. The visionary stuff has been there. You know, we're still one of the countries with the highest level of state education. So what do we've got? I think so approximately 85% of New Zealand children go through state education, and another 11% are at state integrated schools. This is extraordinary. We're also an incredibly discursive education system. So we talk and talk. We have shared groups. We do things in group. We have mahitahi. We have shared book reading. We have, let's go and do a group with this and a group with that. So we understand learning not as rows of seats where everybody's sitting there quietly competing against the ghost of the person behind them, to the side of them, in front of them, but we understand a very collective way of learning. And that goes when we're talking about New Zealand education, and this is where some of the reviews, I'm not talking about PISA, but some of the reviews that understand education is from early childhood to the end of universities or tertiary education. So it's that spectrum. And so we have a very proud history, which is worth fighting for, is worth standing for. And we have people, the fact that we're all sitting here in this room when we could be having, pork roast or whatever it is, but we're all sitting here. So it says something. It says something that I'm very proud of. So I wrote the book to go, is there something that I could contribute? And perhaps it might be quiet, considered wisdom, but inside that, I thought the thing I might be able to do is give voice to what it feels like to fail in a system.
And I think you've done that beautifully. And sorry about the noise my dog's making in the background here. She's rattling around on the ground. But yeah, really, it is a very gentle read. So and very affirming, I think. But also, you don't paint some simplistic picture about New Zealand education either. So yeah, I think you've really achieved those goals. Would you like to talk a little bit about the way you talk about intelligence in the book? So these three ideas of intelligence: translative, embodied, and non-linear. Tell people a little bit about your thinking around those concepts.
Sure. So back in the day, a guy called Henry Perron described intelligence as what could be measured. And I think that's bollocks. That's rubbish. That intelligence is actually a beautiful and complex thing. And I spent a long time trying to get a definition for it. And I'm not there yet because I had a wonderful, one of my ex-PhD students who's this incredible, she's a kind of a scientist artist working with sound. And I described it as the conscious ability to solve problems. So in other words, solve problems may not entirely involve rational thought. It might involve tacit knowledge, a crude knowledge that we don't know that we have, that we're able to bring up and use. And it may involve, in a certain situation, may involve non-linear, it may involve illogical as well as logical. So, but I thought it was conscious. And she said, but what about dreaming? So I don't know the answer to this bit. I don't know because I've never solved problems by dreaming, but I don't say that that couldn't happen. I say a definition is only worth something if it's a living thing that is constantly able to change and be shaped by context. So I, in the book, and how I conceive intelligence is the conscious ability to solve problems. So that is a long way from just the application of certain types of pattern finding, deductive or sequential thinking and projection. It embraces that, but it also says that there would be more. And that's come from, I started teaching at 19, I'm 69 now, 70 in a couple of months. And that's what I've come to understand from inside this extraordinary world, that intelligence, the second page on the book just says, I think intelligence is beautiful. And I absolutely do. It's in the true meaning of the word, it is wonderful. And I'm not being euphoric. I'm humbled by it. So I thought there has to be some way of embracing this, so that I think of it as the conscious ability to solve problems, which may use rational thought, but it may use embodied thought and tacit knowing. It may use other things too. I think I don't believe that within it, creativity is the opposite of rational thinking. I don't think they're a binary. I think they combine in thinking. So, this house, so I designed and built this house. So that used both creative thought and rational thought, not as creative as what we do on the Wednesday afternoon if it's been raining and we've got an hour for fun art activities. Creativity was part of the dynamic of rational thinking that enabled me to think about space and volume and the physics of building and the engineering of it, but also to ask the question, how do you capture the spirit of light in a home? So I don't understand creativity as a separate thing to rational thinking. And I also think that one of the things that I think teacher education is hard put on by people wanting us to solve all of society's problems, and we can't. That is a very unfair thing to do. And and people go, oh well, send them to school and get that sort them out. That's that's not that's not possible, and it's not actually our job. But of course, we care for the growth of people, and so we engage with it. So, but I think that a significant amount of learning goes on outside of school. And the reason I think that is it's the only way I can understand why it is that some people who do very badly at school, I meet them 10 years later and they are just shining brilliantly in the world. So I listen to them a lot. I'm a pain in the butt, really. I want to know why. I want to know what is it that enables you to do these things. And sometimes it's the fact that they were in a kapahaka group, or they had a passion for stone tools, or they had, there can be something quite idiosyncratic, but there was a space that had a different kind of time. It wasn't a regulated and tested time. It was a time that was much more in the flow of life, but it was fertile. And so, therefore, I believe that what parents, communities, partners, brothers, sisters, what we do in the world is also teaching. But if I take Sylvia Ashton Warner's idea of it, she says, she doesn't think of herself as a teacher. She thinks of herself as someone who shapes education. So I I believe that, so imagination, we know that imagination is a highly developed skill that is there before kids get to school. So that's not had formal training. It's not had formal education. We haven't had Wednesday afternoon at between 10 and 11. We'll have 1 hour of imagination. I think you'd be hard pushed trying to push that past some of the contemporary political thinking at the time. But we also learn our first language before we come into school. We learn we learn how to walk. We learn, and we all know young kids who have learned how to persuade very well at the age of 4. They know how to wield guilt. They know how to, so, so we are formal schooling, compulsory formal schooling is part of a wider thing. And in a way, while we are very anxious about doing harm or not doing a good job, we're also part of a continuum. So oftentimes we will inherit injury. We get people who come, we all know, they come to your class, they may be super cool, but they're hurt and they're not going to take any risks. They just want to know the formula. They want to see some examples and don't dare shake that, And so I see that I agree with Sylvia Ashton Warner. I think that what teaching is, and what teaching is the garden. I just made this up on the hoof when I was talking to Catherine Ryan on RNZ, but it's the best way I can understand. I've just been watching a free movie on YouTube, and it was The Constant Gardener. Well, I didn't really like the movie, but I loved the title, and I thought, that's right. That's when I go down into my garden. There are things that haven't come up yet, and in my garden are lots of different plants, but they're growing in the same space. And it's my job to make sure that that soil is as fertile for as many different things that will share the same space, and they will share the same time together. And I'm going to try and do two things. I'm going to try to help them be the healthiest plant they can, and I'm going to try to protect them from harm. And in there, I will adopt the position of appreciating the beauty of what grows.
I love the way you talk about that. There's a real reverence and a humility embedded in that way of thinking about the work of teachers. And I just wondered if you could share with people the story of Miss Joel. This is the part in the book where I had to shut the door and I got a bit sobby. Like it's just such a beautiful story and it's so true. So yeah, would you just tell people the story of Miss Joel?
Yeah, it's easier to tell because, they asked me to do an audio book of this, which will be coming out in a couple of months. They always hold the audio book off until later. And I started crying when I was reading it. And unfortunately, it's got a bit of singing in it, and I have not talent as a singer, But basically, we recognize that it's probably you. In truth, it's you. those teachers who, when we look back, we know that they had a more profound impact than they will ever know. And so I was back in the day of School C, I was in a class called 5RB, and R stood for returns. So it was understood that we would be having 2 goes at School C, or 3, or we'd return until we finally lost hope and left. So we were all grouped in the same class. And so we were given to Miss Jull, who was the senior mistress at Te Awamutu College, who some people remember her as a veritable harpy with twin set and pearls and a detention book. But I loved her. I thought she was wonderful, and and so she didn't take any nonsense. So we all learnt to keep our heads down and try to find as many ways of not doing work and not thinking as we could without crossing the border and coming into the light and getting punished. And so we had to learn one play, Pygmalion, one book. It had to be short, so it was Animal Farm, and a couple of poems. And so but we were taught to learn the poems by heart because we couldn't really understand them through onomatopoeia or assonance or alliteration or iambic pentameter or any other analysis poetic, so we could quote. And she, this day, she stood up and she read to us Wilfred Owen's Dulce Decorum Mei. I'd never heard it before. And we were all sort of sitting there going, oh, no, looking at the second hand on the clock, going, come on. Oh, hell, I don't know if you've read that poem, but, poetry is meant for the human voice. It's not meant for the silence of a turning page. And here was this woman reading this thing, and it was shattering. It was shattering. And especially because it was Miss Jull. She was talking about froth-corrupted lungs and incurable sores on dead men's bodies. And it wasn't yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. It was death of young people like us who were sent to war. And partway through, she started crying. And it just, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. And I was shocked. I think we were all shocked. And then we thought, well, what are we supposed to do with this? And then she recovered herself as such teachers are able to do sometimes. And she said, now you have to learn those verses off for homework. So that threw the ice water on the whole thing. And she said, and tomorrow morning you've got to come in and I'm going to give you a piece of paper. You've got to write it out. And anyone who doesn't have it learnt will have detention. So we went, okay, so we're back in the realm of the normal again. And so she asked us to copy it down off the board. But you can copy when you can't read, but you have to copy the shape of the words a lot of the time. And it's quite hard to do. But you're embarrassed about people knowing that you can't read. So you've got to try and hide it. And so I'd copied the title down, but I was obsessed with froth-corrupted lungs. I just kept thinking, what on earth does that look like? And I'm afraid my unbridled imagination was probably making it fairly cinematic. So I started drawing a soldier in my book with froth-corrupted lungs. And Miss Jull came round, and unfortunately she saw it. And I thought, oh, shit, here we go. And she, she did the most amazing thing. She knew I couldn't read. And she must have known I wasn't going to be able to learn the stuff because I wasn't even if I could copy it down, I wasn't going to know. And she took a pencil and she wrote on my book, ETHOS. And she said, do you know what that is? And so I was really embarrassed that the kids would see that Miss Jull was talking to me, so I was sort of going, oh, shit, get away from me. And I said, no. And she said, it's a Greek word. And I thought, well, this is an English class, And she said, it's ethos. Have you ever heard of ethos? Well, of course, Puke Ultra Farm Boy, I'd never heard of ethos. I thought it might have been something to do with Aesop or something, but I shut my mouth. And she said, it's the spirit of something. She said, that poem has a spirit. And I thought, yeah, it does. It does. This is talking to the dumb class. She was talking to the dumb kid. And she said, you don't have to learn it. I want you to bring me the ethos of the poem tomorrow. Well, I was amazed. Secretly, I was so proud that she thought that I could do something like this. And I knew this new word. And I didn't want the other kids to know what she'd said, so I didn't talk about it. But I went home and I dropped the word ethos into conversation over the dinner table multiple times. And skiting that I knew this word, and Miss Joll had asked me to bring the ethos of the poem. So everything was ethos. And my pop, so Pop was my grandma's second husband, and he was a lovely man. He's very quiet. And I was telling him about Wilfred Owen's poem, and he said, "Do you realise it was a protest?" And I said, "Oh, no, it's like froth corrupted lungs." And he said, no. He was protesting against the war. When he went back to England, he was put in a psychiatric hospital and then sent back to the war, and he was killed in the very last days, and he was only 25. And I thought, shit. And then Pop said to me, it was after dinner, and we'd gone into the lounge, and I said to him, "Do you have some badges or something that I can take to show Miss Joll as the ethos of the thing?" And he said, "It's not the spirit." And he did, it's quite, I try to write about it in the book, but it's quite hard. When an adult talks to you as a kid, like another adult, and he told me, I can never remember the words enough. The thing was so powerful. He said, when you're in the trenches and you haven't been able to sleep, and the cobber who you promised to protect, his body is lying only yards away from you, and you can smell it and you can't get it back, and you don't know if you're asleep or awake anymore. You don't know. And he said, so you hum, and when you go, you can feel the vibration in your head, so you know you're alive. And he said, we used to hum in the trenches, and we used to hum. And my mum had a piano, which was out of tune badly, I guess, and he played this, and he sang to me in this crackly old voice, and so the next day I went to school, and Miss Joll started the lesson with a comprehension exercise, and we all thought, oh, she's forgotten. So we did the comprehension. Well, I didn't, but we pretended to do the comprehension exercise. And then we're getting right up towards the end of the lesson, and she says, all right, get out a piece of paper. And she wrote Dulce Decorum Me up on the board, and I thought, oh, shit. She said, write it down. No one had learned it. No one had learned it. And she walked around the room, and she walked up. I always remember she walked up and she looked out the window, and the bell went, and we gingerly packed up our bags, and then seeing her not move, fled out of the classroom. So like clowns, we jolly meat, we didn't get attention, and I joined the kids going down, and then I thought, oh, sorry, she wrote ethos in my book. And so I walked back up the steps to her classroom, and I stood at the door, and I sang, abide with me, soft falls the eventide, when darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide, when other helpers fail and comfort flees, help to the helpless, Lord, abide with me. And I just thought, oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. I've just done the wrong thing. And there was not a sound. And she, and I looked up, I've still got it upstairs. I stole it. I never gave it back. She gave me a little blue book of Wilfred Owen's poems. And she said, I want you to go away and read them and tell me which is the best one.
Wow.
And I wanted to say, I can't read, but she knew. So I went home. I still think it's his best one. I mean, he did write some crap. I'm so sorry. I know that's heresy, but he did. But he was young, shit. I wrote crap. I still write crap. He was doing great stuff at 25. And and I couldn't read all the words, but I could get enough. And I found this amazing thing in poetry. You didn't have to read lots of words to have your heart stabbed with the meaning. You didn't have to. And so I realized poetry was not William Wordsworth and daffodils. Protest poetry was something profound. And of course, at that time, protest poetry was spilling over into lyrics of songs. And so slowly I I wanted to read, and no one was taking a measuring rule. No one was asking me to finish Bert's word recognition test. No one was asking me to write the things, and and I never told her the poem, but she never asked me, but she was interested in my drawings, in my art, and then the really tough thing, and this is the reason I write about it in the book, was I never told her how she shaped my world. I never told her. And and she died in an old people's home in Whanganui. And that's why now I know that when a student, we've all had it, a student comes to us years later and they tell us it's a huge thing because we don't expect those things. And it's even difficult for us to handle because in a way, if we invest with intellectual intimacy, we face a kind of cumulative divorce and loneliness because we know that every relationship is temporal. And but the sincere touch of intellectual interest and belief is a very powerful thing, very, very powerful thing. And so I included the story to try and talk about that because I have always felt really protective of teachers who commit emotionally to the journeys of people because we're often warned not to. You go, keep your professional distance, and you go, if professional distance means don't smile to Easter, bugger off. Because there are people who come in with injuries and they need care. But what you do know is that I will be safe in your world. In some ways, even on our worst days, sometimes we're the only things that a kid can have to hang on to. And they can't even sometimes show us that. We can just see it. And we're flawed. So we can't be, we're not, you know, we're not gods. We're just trying to do the best we can. So the book has got stories like that in it because I thought if education is human and that's something that we are not giving enough attention to, why not? I should populate the book with humanity. So with the stories that we recognize from the ordinary world, so that we don't suffer professional loneliness. And so we know that it is right to fight back against the sanitizing and the sterilizing of emotion and passion and learning, arguing that it can be replaced by some fundamentalist, narrow approach to understanding.
So, and so people, you can see what I mean. This book is, yeah, the humanity is, but the other thing you achieve, you absolutely populate it with humanity, but you also don't kind of sterilize the humans. Like there's no sort of heroes here. There's just people. And so you've started talking about it, but perhaps the last question I'll ask you before we open up to everyone else's questions is if you could think a little bit more or say a few more things about sort of current directions in education in light of your commitments within the book. One thing that really, really worries me is the move to kind of teacher proofing.
Mm, mm,
You know, great people have written about that as a very dangerous move. And I think it's a move that loses so much possibility. So yeah, if you could just reflect on that now as well.
So I understand I have a bias. I believe that humanity and wisdom are powerful things, and in times of disruption and discord, they are things that we need. So I am very proud of our education system. I don't think that we're in crisis. I get very irritated when I hear, whether it's back in 1950 when the Great Panic swept through about New Zealand's national intelligence is falling, whether it's the anxiety around mathematics in the early 1990s, that when somebody wields a reform in on the back of hyper anxiety, it's a dangerous signal. It's a dangerous signal because it puts out of gear rational thinking. So, and people, hey, they love their kids. They go, oh, writing's in crisis, or maths is in crisis, or science is in crisis. They always math, science, or literacy, because for some reason those things are easy to measure on some things. Nobody ever goes the humanities are in crisis. Nobody ever goes the arts are in crisis. They are so in such a precarious place at the moment, you know. So, but so I so the reason that we're here, and the reason I said yes to this, was that um, we we have the ability to critique, and I've watched with pride to see some of the discourse that's surfacing from our profession, from our sector, that is unpacking this stuff. We shouldn't have to, but we do have to. We do have to, and we have to stand, because it's actually not about us. It's about the sophistication that is needed to educate a nation. And to do that, you have to have a very flexible, enough flexibility to embrace and find the spectrum of plants that will be in that garden. Not saying you now all have to become like buddleias and all grow the same way and we will grow great buddleias and you all to become buddleias. No, you just go, the diversity is a beautiful problem and a beautiful challenge, and they exist in society for a reason, and a healthy education system can embrace that. It doesn't ignore it. It doesn't take words out of a reader because it says it won't mix with the scientific method of understanding reading. It goes, here is a tool that is a contribution to the other tools in your box. Don't empty your toolbox out of the things that work, because you are the teacher. You understand the context, you know. But more so, I love it when there is funding put into helping diverse sectors of our communities. That's a wonderful thing. I'm very proud when I see it. I am not proud when I see the reduction of complexity down to poorly described initiatives that have panic timeframes on them, in the hope that there will be insufficient rigorous critique to hold up something that is not worthy of the complexity of what we have and the complexity and sophistication of the education sector.
Well said. Thank you. There are some questions here, so I'm just going to go to them now. So this is first from Michael Harvey. Welby, you've often spoken about education needing to nurture humanity and creativity rather than just compliance. In an age where AI is increasingly shaping how we teach, assess, and even relate to knowledge, how do we ensure that our education system protects and cultivates the humanity of both teachers and students rather than outsourcing it to the machine?
All right. So thanks for the question, mate. So I don't talk about AI in the book because I don't think AI is intelligence. It is a synthesis. It's cognitive mechanics, and it's a form of synthesis. It's not intelligence. It's not embodied. So I don't use the term. No, I have trouble using the term AI to describe it, but I understand that that's how it's understood in the world. I It's interesting. So I've got PhD students at the moment who are working with AI in film. And one of the big problems they've got is often it's so attractive. It can throw stuff together, but they actually lose their ability to art direct their film. And so it wears thin very quickly. It has some useful tool. It can be a useful tool for things, but it is an ineffective tool if we lose the agency to draw on the complexity of what intelligence is. So I, um, so I don't use AI to write because because it took so long to learn to read. I love reading. I love reading magnificently rich literature, and I love it because I I go to bed with the voice of another person. I go to bed with the intimate connection to thoughts through another person, and it's the same with music. It's the same with art. And so I'm looking for an intellectual intimacy. And we know, no, a lot of current discourse says that the most valued things that will be in our society will be the things beyond what can be done by cognitive mechanics. So those are things like discernment, justice in nuanced situations, uh, sensitive humane advocacy, um, um, imagining beyond what currently is digitized and synthesizable. So to imagine beyond what is, those are the things that are not that will become very precious. And so, you know, it's one of the things we're pushing right at the moment is to go understand AI, but also critique AI so you don't lose the value in the shiny gloss of what can appear to be articulate. Don't sacrifice something greater, because the difficulty we face is that it can look glossier than what we're capable of at any given time. But it is only about an output. It doesn't understand the process, doesn't understand that learning occurs inside a process. And so that's why we have to be careful of education that becomes obsessed with outputting and measuring outputs, because you can ask AI to do an output, but you can't. It's interesting. I was looking at a piece of exegetical writing that one of my students had done, and it suddenly it lost its voice. It smoothed out, and I wrote back and said, "Where have you gone?" And he'd got afraid. He'd been afraid, and he'd used AI to do something. And um, it's a tool that's not. It's an artificial tool. Helpful. Lots of our tools are artificial. Helpful. But we have to know. That's why one of the reasons for the book, I thought we have to think about what intelligence really is, so we know what is worth valuing and what is worth resourcing. So we have to think again, and we have to think more richly about intelligence than something that can be equated with cognitive processing and mechanical cognitive processing.
Wonderful. Thank you. So another question, this is actually from the same person, but Claire Amos really wants me to ask this question, so I'm going to ask this question. Welby, the proposed NCA changes talk about raising equity and clarity, but isn't there a danger that in trying to standardise learning, and as we discussed before people came on, narrow learning, we strip away the humanity, creativity and critical questioning that education needs to protect? How do we stop reform from becoming just another exercise in control? And I might like to reflect more broadly on the narrowing of curriculum in the NCA proposal.
Sure. So I'm going to step back one step from it. We will endure beyond any political reform. So education was here before it, and it will be here after it. So we shaped its past and we look after its future. And I'm sorry, I'm using some words that I had in a conversation with you, Vivian, before we even went on air, but I thought, oh, you're
Saying them.
yeah, yeah, it's right. So in a way, I'm irritated by this stuff, but I also know we are stronger and we are we are here for longer. We are here for longer, but undoing damage is really difficult. It's hard enough as we are. To have to undo damage is difficult. So I am proud when I see things like this. When I hear my colleagues talking in early childhood, in primary education, and now the question of the gatekeepers at the end of, a child when a student when they leave secondary compulsory education, secondary school, has spent over 2/3 of their life in formal schooling, and they have to be able to walk out of those gates with dignity. Their mana has to be intact, and they have to be able to look back and go, the complexity of who I am was grown, understood, appreciated, and grown. So I'm now equipped for a world of variables, and you're not going to get that with a template. You're not. So no, that's like designing something for an imagined past. And I'm not trying to be a what is it, chronocentric. I'm not trying to say, we're on the cusp of change and nothing. Look, we're always on the cusp of change. We're always on the cusp of change. But we have to use rigorous common sense. So people are not the same. We are all neuro and culturally divergent, every one of us. Every one of us is. And so therefore, it is logical to say that an education system would be shaped around working with that. So we have to push back. And I think one of the ways that some of the things I've seen that make me feel very proud is the quality of critique which is coming out. But it's also, you're up against something that doesn't always behave reasonably, because it may not be driven by rational thought. It may be driven by other agendas. And so we have to both speak up and then learn to protect as much as we can the temporary damage that something does. And so we have done this for decades. Teachers are masters at taking the language and disabling the wrong. We're not supposed to say it out loud, but we do. But it's a pain because it takes so much energy and work that we're trying to use for something that is working. And I think so. We stopped things like bulk funding in schools. We stopped things that were they come from a similar world. What Todd Rose calls the Taylorist analysis, which is that it's the role of education to equip people for industry. I think it was very unfortunate that somebody said, I like to think that he wouldn't have said it if he'd thought, to say that the aim of our education is to make an intelligent workforce so we can attract overseas funding investment. Of course it's not. Of course it's not. We would be, what would be the intellectual sweatshop of the world? I'm sure I would like to think that the person would retract that and find another way of speaking about it, especially to a hugely educated profession.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to put two questions together. So I'm just watching these other questions. So we may not get through all of them, people, but I'll do my best. So this is from Imogene Kelly. I'm one of the students who was inspired and excited by your work at AUT Welby. I always see you speak when I can, and I love your films. So there's a bit of fan thing going on here. How do you feel about the current kōrero about neurodivergence among the younger generation? Ngā mihi nui kia koe e te rangatira. And then there's another question which bounces off that, so just hold that one. Bouncing off Imogene's question, thoughts on comments we hear in the current climate about structured literacy and the science of learning, helping neurodivergent learners and solving behaviour issues, and where this fits with the concept of embodied intelligence.
Right. So the word divergent and the word diverse all understand plural. So neurodiversity is not a singular thing, nor is if we use the word autism or dyslexia, they're not a single thing. So we want, that it always seems to me that in education, if there's any tool that we are given, we want diagnostic tools. We want to understand how someone thinks. So if a form of structured literacy is working for someone, great. Let's find out as much as we can about it, and let's find out the devices and the various strategies that people have used in different contexts. Really use it, add it to the toolbox, and resource it with knowledge. And if that works for some people, then that is a great thing. So I don't buy into the public binary with this, of going, this should not be there and this should be there. What I think is that just as a good, so if you think of doctors are there to help us look after our physical health in the world. So we go to them for diagnosis, not for comparativeness. And they will have, if they're a very good doctor, she might look at us and go, well, it could be this. Let's check this symptom. Let's check this. It could be this. But given your lifestyle, maybe you need to have this. So they will be using a spectrum of professionally very astute, rigorous analysis of the individual situation, and using the best tool and using that as context located and as rigorously as possible. So I think education is the same. I think we are trying to look after the intellectual, social, if you like, spiritual health of people, so that that I don't think a tool, a device for learning, if it's had a lot of analysis and research and refinement, it's a helpful thing, but it is not the God of the pantheon to take any. And we fall into, at our peril, we fall into fundamentalist answers. Mine, as some of you will be the same. My education was littered with messiahs. I remember at university, I did psychology, and it was the age of behaviorism. Oh, hell, B.F. Skinner. Well, shit. Sorry, but, but it was the only thing. It was it was the way to understand the world, and I thought, I think I want something more. I want to know other things too. And so fundamentalism, and I believe that fundamentalism is a thing driven by fear, and it can exist only in an anxious environment because it suggests simple answers and doesn't invite critique. So my view is that if something works for somebody, and it's a useful tool, we need resourcing and we need knowledge about it, but not at the cost of other tools, because we are diverse and it requires sophisticated, diverse alternatives. If one thing doesn't work, then we have a look at something else.
Thank you. Such a beautiful answer. And so there's a few comments in the chat from people who were in your classes and who are now really passionate about supporting tamariki. There's more questions about how we best advocate in a joined up way, what you see as most important that teachers hang on to. And I think you've answered a lot of those things just with your reflections now. So hopefully everybody, you feel that your questions have been answered. I guess there's just one, I might just finish with one question, which is I'm very curious about policies or modes of policy making that you think researchers should be aiming their critique towards, or how we advocate for and defend the humanity and complexity of students' intelligence in a coordinated way. So I guess any final thoughts on how you feel this community should work together moving forward to honour the past and look after the future?
It's a very deep question.
Question. You've got 1 minute.
Yeah, so please forgive me for what will seem like a shallow answer, because I'm running on the hoof here. I believe in research and I believe in data. And I believe that if research is done, I would rather hear it from the researcher who's going to give the honest investment, rather than from someone who's cherry picking, treating it eisegetically. So I think that the devices we use to inform and help each other, and the more we share, the stronger we are. So it might sound like a weak thing, but actually I think there's huge strength in it. To be more informed by the person than the person giving advice. That's the thing that fundamentalism does not want. It's the thing that is so difficult. And it can be every little thing. You might be able to show up to Wellington to the protest about language. You might be able to sit in and go to the staff room tomorrow and have a cup of tea with someone and talk about some ideas that you disagreed with me, or that something came and you went, shit, but actually in my context, it looks like that. But the thing that we cannot do is fall into the trap of cynicism, because then we disable. Cynicism is the death of hope, and it's the death of agency. So our action, whatever form it takes, is a valuable thing. And if we can also support the action of others, then that makes us a formidable force ongoing. So it sounds like, I'm sorry, it sounds like a simple answer. I've had to give it an overview, and I suspect there are other rich dimensions to it that I haven't covered.
I think it's wonderful. And I think when you give up on academia, you can both run a retreat out of your house, because I want to hang out in that house. It's beautiful. And you can start making like magnets for fridges with these Welbyisms on them. So I've written some of them down. So the complexity relationship. We're shaped by the past. We're responsible for looking after the future. Undoing damage is difficult. Have the long view. Engage in rigorous common sense. I just love that one. We are all culturally and neurodivergent, which is a very helpful way to think about the complexity of ourselves as teachers and the young people who we work with. We have to push back But we cannot fall into cynicism. That's the death of hope, the death of agency, and we need to support the hope of others. And the work of kaiako is supporting the intellectual, social, and spiritual health of people. So, Welby, huge thanks for your sharing with us and your generosity. I feel like we kind of maybe should do this once a month, just as therapy, because it is so therapeutic hearing that long view. And my dad is a retired teacher, and he says to me, Viv, just stop getting head up. Exactly what you say. This political cycle is just one blip. So yeah, it's really, really good to be reminded of holding the long view, that education has never been perfect. It never will be. We're humans, but we work with other humans. And so it's this human work that is really critical. So ngā mihi nui kia koe e te rangatira mō tō taima, mō o whakaro i tēnei pō. Kia koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawa nui, mauri ora koutou. So thank you, Welby. And this recording will be available online. And yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Claire, for managing the tech behind the scenes. And sorry, we didn't quite get to all the questions, but yeah, really, really grateful to everyone for your time and to you, Welby, tonight. So thank you, everyone. Ka kite.
Thank you.